So I was raised in a small town. Not born in one, but raised in one, in a little town called Perry, Kansas, population about 900 people. It's in northeast Kansas. You probably have no clue where it is. Unless you've been in that area, then you don't know. It's near Topeka and Lawrence, kind of right in the middle, about 45 minutes west of Kansas City. We had a pretty good-sized lake. We had a grocery store. We moved across town when I was in high school. It was a whole mile across town. I remember riding my bike to the post office as a kid in order to get our mail, turn the little dial on our P.O. box and get the mail for our town. We were such a small town in the parsonage we lived in. The house phone and the church phone were the same, so you never knew what phone you were answering. Like, it could be somebody from church, or it could be somebody calling for my parents outside of church. You never really knew. But it was small. We liked it. I remember in about 86, we got a Casey's, which was the big deal. You can now go to the gas station and get pizza, which was kind of fun for us. But I also remember other things about my town. Like, there was not a lot to do. If you were born there and raised there, then you would go and you would see people that you knew everywhere. You'd see them at the grocery store or at the hardware store / cafe. Or other places in town. I worked in a pizza place. Everybody would come in and get pizza. Our school was part of a consolidated school district, USD 343. And I kind of have that engraved in my mind as you watch for snow days, right? In school, growing up. We had 70 people in my graduating class. We were the largest of 4 towns around us, and that was it. And some of you are going, well, that's bigger than my class. Yeah, it might be, and you might know what it is to be from a small town. There's not a lot to do. We would go to Topeka or Lawrence, either way, about 20 minutes away for entertainment, for a movie. We'd go to Kansas City for concerts or baseball games, and all those things, because there really wasn't a lot to do. And as you know, if you're from a small town, unless you're like Carrie Underwood and you get discovered somehow other than your town, then people don't know who you are. They don't really expect big things to come from little places. We will look to New York or London or Paris or LA or all these places for big things to come. That's where the stars are. But that's not really how God works. If we look for the big, God's looking for the little. He's looking for little things, little places to make big impacts. And that's what we see with Bethlehem. We lit the candle earlier, this Advent candle that represents Bethlehem. This little off-the-beaten-path place that really not a lot of people knew about. They'd look over it. Growing up, people didn't know about Perry unless they heard about the lake. In biblical times, people knew about Bethlehem because of what was said about this little tiny town long before Jesus came to be. And I want us to look there. We're going to be in Micah 5:2 today. It's page 779. And while you're looking there, I really want you to get there. But while you're looking there, I want to give you a little background about Micah. Because if you're like me, you probably haven't read the book of Micah this year. You probably haven't read his prophecy, and you may only know the part that we're talking about today. This may be all that you know about Micah. So let's get a little history of Micah. Micah was a prophet in about 800 BC. He was a contemporary of King Hezekiah, who was the last good king of Judah. Hezekiah did some really kind of stupid things. There was a convoy from Babylon that had come in to check out Jerusalem, and Hezekiah tried to show off a little bit. He said, hey, let me show you all of our gold. Let me show you our entire treasury. Well, what happened there is God said, okay, yeah, because you did that, those people are going to take everything. Hezekiah is also the king that was on his deathbed, and he prayed for God to give him more life, and God set the sun back 10 steps and promised Hezekiah, I'll give you 15 more years. How'd you like that to know, hey, you have 15 more years and then you're done? I mean, none of us know when our days will be over, but Hezekiah knew, I've got 15 years. Let's live it really well. Micah was able to speak into the court of King Hezekiah. As a prophet, he was able to tell him what would happen. He knew that there would be a time when Israel would be in captivity for 70 years. He knew what the consequences of a nation's sin would be because of their king. But Micah gets this really cool opportunity to write into Israel's history the birthplace of the Messiah. And think about that. Isaiah got to say, he'll be born of a virgin. He got to say kind of a time period he'd be a light to the Gentiles. He actually got to foretell his death, the death of Jesus. But Micah is the only place where we see this, where he says this is where the Messiah will be born. And what you're going to notice today is that in our text, it never says the word Messiah. It says ruler. A ruler will come from you, but it never says the word Messiah. But everybody knows that this is about the Messiah. And so what I'm going to ask you to do as we read Micah 5:2-4 is I'm going to ask you to do some things for me. If you are a note taker, write down notes. What sticks out to you? What words, what phrases, what names of places stick out to you? What is it that you can go, hey, I've heard this before? Or that you can say in your faith, this means something. Let me write it down and maybe I'll think about it more later. Or as the sermon goes along, I'm going to think about this. And that's okay. Let's read that. I want you to do that and think about this. And I'm going to apologize because I have practiced a name, a phrase here, and I'm going to mess it up. And so that's just what's going to happen. So I want you to take note of things that are happening in here. And we're going to read this. Micah 5:2-4. Here we are. But you, O Bethlehem of Judah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days. That has weight to it. Therefore he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. Then the rest of his brothers shall return to the people of Israel, and he shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they shall dwell secure, for now he shall be great to the ends of the earth. All right, stop for a moment. Let's think about this. There's a lot going on. Right? This is 3 verses of the Bible, prophecy, and there's a whole lot to look at. A whole lot that you go, I don't understand this. And we remember, we lit the Bethlehem candle, which points back to this moment, but it also points forward to the Christ, the Messiah, coming, and it points forward again to what we get to do now with this. But the Bethlehem candle equals love. Right? That's what we said this stands for. This candle stands for love. We light these. The prophecy candle stands for hope. The Bethlehem candle stands for love. The love of Christ coming into the world. And what we see in the prophet Micah is that Bethlehem, though a very small town, would have a great significance. It's a town that he says is too little to be named among the clans of Judah. In other words, he's saying, look, your tribe doesn't even recognize you as a town. You're overlooked. You're a bedroom community, much like my hometown, a bedroom community, though I could get anywhere quickly. Now, just if you've never been there, you don't know about it, which I've never been there, I don't know much, I had to learn. Bethlehem is located 5 miles south of Jerusalem. Now, remember, in biblical history, everybody always went up to Jerusalem to worship. Bethlehem was often overlooked as people went up to Jerusalem. It sat in the shadow of the temple. And I don't know if this is true or not, but I like to imagine that Bethlehem, from there you could see the temple sitting on the mount. You could just see. Now that's where God is, and here's where we are in our little valley in this place, waiting for something to happen. For perspective, if you've crossed Highway 97 on the river lately and looked downtown, it's about 7-8 miles. Bethlehem was only 5 miles. It was less distance from Sand Springs to downtown Tulsa. It was less distance to Jerusalem from Bethlehem than it is from Sand Springs to downtown Tulsa. And yet, it was a city that was overlooked. A little town. We sing this, a little town of Bethlehem. Like this little town that God did something incredible, that would have rested here. It was like many small villages, right? Close in proximity to a big city, but overlooked by everyone else. Bethlehem, it actually means house of bread. I imagine there were bakeries there, different places you could smell bread baking. I almost brought a bread machine in today just so you could smell the bread and get hungry, but then I thought you'd want to leave early, so I didn't do that. But it was that house of bread. You could smell this throughout. I wonder if people went there to get bread and then walked back to Jerusalem, if that was the place. The Ephrath, whatever it is, that actually means fruitful. Which I'm telling you, I practiced this and I couldn't get it down, so it's okay. It means fruitful, which means, and that's a sign of the region. It's Bethlehem of this region. It's like Tulsa of Oklahoma, right? It's of the region. And what that means is that was a fruitful land. The produce grew. The crops were good in this place. I think it's so interesting that as we talk about Jesus, if you fast forward quite a bit, in John 6, 35 and 48, that Jesus actually calls himself the bread of life. And he came from a town that is known as the house of bread. I think God was really smart in doing that. He knew exactly what he was saying. The bread that you find in Bethlehem is good. The bread you find in Jesus is even better. Biblical history, the town of Bethlehem is mentioned a few times. It is the place where Sarah was buried nearby. It actually says that in Genesis 35:19 that Abraham buried his wife Sarah on the way to Bethlehem. You have a couple of really odd and random and disturbing references in the book of Judges to Bethlehem. In Judges 17 and 19, this is the story of this Levite and a concubine, and you can read that for yourself. I'm not going to dive into that a lot. One of the most significant stories in biblical history of this town is from a lady named Naomi, who her and her husband and her boys left, right, and to a foreign land because there was a drought in this fruitful area, and her boys, Mahlon and Chilion, they marry foreign women, and Orpah and Ruth, and the boys die because their names mean sickly and weak. And Ruth stays with her mother-in-law Naomi and goes back to this town where she's from, this town called Bethlehem, where she meets a man named Boaz. Boaz and Ruth have a son named Obed, who then has a son named Jesse, who has a son named David, who we know as king. And in 1 Samuel, you see Samuel, the prophet, God telling him, look, I know Saul's king now, but I'm taking the throne away from him. I want you to go anoint the new king. And I want you to go to Bethlehem, and I want you to meet this man named Jesse, and I want you to anoint one of his sons king. And I'm not going to tell you who yet. And so he goes, and he has a feast, and he invites Jesse and his sons, and the oldest son comes, and Samuel thinks, well, surely this is the guy. He's tall, he's handsome, he's strong. And God says, no. Man looks at outward appearance, I look at the heart. So down the line they go until they find out that one son is not there, and they call David from the hillside where he's tending the sheep, the shepherd with his sheep, and he brings him in and says, okay, this is the guy, and he anoints him as king because God was looking at his heart. There's a little bit in me that wonders if the faithfulness of the people who had lived in Bethlehem and of this line that God had already promised, I'm bringing the Messiah from the line of David, if the faithfulness there, looking at the heart of the people and the city, this town, this little town, God said, I'm going to bring the Messiah from there. I'm going to do something so remarkable that I am going to have the Messiah literally come forth from this town. Now, come forth is an interesting word there in Micah 5:2, because it doesn't say God is going to place the Messiah in Bethlehem. He is going to come forth from there. He is actually going to be from that place. That is going to be his birthplace, where he's known to be from. I have wondered this as I wrote this week in a study. I kept going, if I were Micah, would I just immediately move to Bethlehem? Would I pack everything up and go? I mean, if God's telling me, hey, the Messiah's going to come from this town, wouldn't I want to be there? Wouldn't I want to be where God is going to do something great, or would I want to be where God is doing something great in me now? Understanding his role, being able to say, this is what God is doing. This Messiah would come. He would be a ruler who is set aside for God, prepared since ancient days. There's just something remarkable about those words when you read it. You, O Bethlehem, too little to be named among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from old, from ancient days. He's coming from Bethlehem, but he's coming from someplace so much deeper, so much further away, from ancient days. You know, in biblical times, the place you came from mattered. I mean, it's how you were known. Many people in that day wouldn't travel more than 100 miles from where they were born. Like that was their circle, 100 miles. I drove 300 miles on my car this week. I checked it. I mean, we go all over the place, and these people didn't hardly travel at all. And so it didn't matter if you moved around a lot. You wouldn't go more than 100 miles from home. For us, we move all over the world all the time. People do that. It's easy. our country is much more transient than they were. They stayed in one place. And so where you were from matters. If you think about it, when Philip is sitting under the tree and Andrew asks him, or he says, come see this guy who's told me this. And he says, well, can anything good come from Nazareth? Because that's where Jesus grew up. But later, as Jesus' ministry continues, there's this verse, this random verse in John 7:42. I forgot to put it on the screen. John 7:42. When people are asking about Jesus, he's teaching, and they're going, "Who is this guy? What's with him?" And here's what they say. They say, "Has not the Scripture said that the Christ comes from the offspring of David and comes from Bethlehem, the village where David was?" Where people were from mattered. And if God said, in this case, the Messiah is going to come from Bethlehem, then people would pay attention. I mean, if God had said, hey, the Messiah is going to come from Jerusalem, and he's going to come in this year, don't you think people would pay attention? At the same time, don't you think people would be like, hey, my son's the Messiah. My son's the Messiah. It takes such an incredible thing for God to say, I'm going to come to this little tiny dot on the map that people overlook. Too little to be named among its own tribe and its own people, and I'm going to do something so remarkable from there that you cannot miss it. You cannot miss that the Messiah is going to come from there. So Micah tells us this. He says, Bethlehem is the birthplace of the Messiah. Right? 800 BC, he says, Bethlehem's going to be the birthplace of the Messiah. But then he says something else. He says, this is what will happen when the birth happens. Let's look at this. 5:3, this is what it says. It says, therefore, he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. Then the rest of his brothers shall return to the people of Israel. So if you read that verse, you're probably going to go, who is he? Who is she? Who are the rest of the brothers? And there's really three questions you can ask right there. Now, without knowing everything that's happening in history and all these things, it'd be easy to go, I have no clue what this is about. Skip over this. But let's look at this. He shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. So he is God. And God is saying, I'm going to give up my people until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. Now, it would be easy to miss the significance of this little section here. Because remember, Micah is writing right before these labor pains coming out of this. Whatever it is, I think it's remarkable that this is probably the moment when God says, I will bring my people back. And when he says Israel, he's not talking about just this nation of Israel. He's talking about the people of God as a whole. And so he says, I'm going to send you off into captivity to sin until the moment when she who is in labor has given birth, and then he shall call all people back to Israel. The significance here cannot be overlooked, that God is doing something remarkable in bringing his people back because he wants to save them. In fact, that's what the angel told Joseph in Matthew 1:21. He says this when he's talking about Mary. Don't be afraid to marry her because she will bear a son. And guess what? You shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. This moment when she who is in labor gives birth to a son who will save his people, the Messiah, a ruler who will reign on high, who is from ancient days. What if Micah's prophecy was meant to show us the eternal impact of the Messiah? What if the birth of Jesus meant that God's people were no longer going to be given over to captivity of sin? What if God is really sending Jesus into the world to redeem humanity? Whether it's about Bethlehem being in labor or Mary being in labor, it doesn't really matter. The birth of the Messiah, the labor pains giving birth to the ruler who has been promised, that all of humanity will be brought together and begin his rule is what we need to understand. And in verse 4, when it says this, and this is his character of how he will reign, he shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they shall dwell secure, for now he shall be great to the ends of the earth. I love this because everything we've seen so far, right, talks about Bethlehem. And it talks about giving birth. And it talks about where the Messiah will come from. Coming forth from Bethlehem. Coming forth from ancient days. This little tiny town with incredible significance. But now we see he'll be a ruler for eternity. And this is what he will do. He will stand and shepherd his flock. That standing is generally understood to mean that he will be installed as king. He will stand over his flock like a shepherd, like David, who had years before stood on those very same hillsides and shepherded his flock. But this king is going to be much more important than David ever was. Much greater than Israel's history could even imagine. Because it's not just about shepherding a nation, it's about shepherding all people in the strength of the Lord. I think we need to make sure that we catch that in verse 4. And underline that if that's what it takes for you to understand this in the Bible. He shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord and in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. I think there's a lot of times, in fact I know there are a lot of times in my own life that I want to do everything in my own strength. I want to make decisions in my own strength. I want to guide people in my own strength. I want to lead my family in my own strength. And yet, even the Messiah, even the one who would rule and shepherd his flock, has to rely on the strength of the Lord. Why don't we do the same? But not only that, but he says he relies on God's strength, and he relies on the mighty name of the Lord. You know, before Moses asked, what is your name? And God said, I am. Nobody really knew. He's just the Lord. Scholars, biblical scholars and scribes would leave out vowels and only write YHVH, Yahweh, Jehovah, which it's actually known as a tetragrammaton, which is the four-letter name of Christ, because they would leave the vowels out. His name was so holy, they didn't even want to say it. They didn't want anything. They were afraid to even say the name of God. But we throw it around casually. I mean, think about it. We throw it around casually among Christians, among society, and yet they're going, we would just revere this mighty name so much that all I can say and call him is Adonai, which means my Lord. He's my Lord. He's in charge. I can't even say the name of the Lord. They revered this so highly, so greatly. So when Micah writes into this and he says, look, he will rule in the strength of the Lord and in his mighty name, there's nothing going to stop this rule. There's nothing that can stop this. He's watching over his sheep in the strength of the Lord. He's watching over his people. And his rule and his reign are to the ends of the earth. They do not stop. It's eternal and all-encompassing. The Messiah will reign universal, which goes back to this idea that he shall return all people to Israel. Even in Micah, God is saying, look, all people belong to me. And my son, the Messiah, will come and rule over all, a people that stretch to the ends of the earth. Okay, so let's recap real quick. So what do we see from Micah's prophecy? Bethlehem is a little tiny town that is too small to even be considered part of its own tribe. Yet, the Messiah would come forth from there, promised from ancient days. He would rule over his people as a shepherd. When the one who is in labor pains gives birth, and all of God's people would come back to him, and he would rule, and he would make them secure. See that? It says he would make them secure. They would dwell secure, and his name shall be great to the ends of the earth. His people would dwell in peace. He would protect his flock to the ends of the earth. He would shepherd them like David had shepherded sheep on those hills, like they saw the shepherds around Bethlehem, and we see that next week on this hillside, watching over the flock. He would rule and watch over his people, bringing them all back to God, casting out sin. And based on the gospel writers, we know this happened. Like, number one, it's remarkable that Micah could go, okay, God is saying he's going to be born in Bethlehem, this little tiny place that nobody really knows much about. David came from there, so that's pretty cool, but okay, Bethlehem, really? But what do we see? What happened? Well, turn to Matthew 2, the Christmas story that we know that really probably happened a couple of years after Jesus was born, when the wise men came, and this is what it says. In Matthew 2, it's page 807 in the Bible in front of you if you need one. It says this, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him.'" Can we just stop right there? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Around 2 years before, these guys saw a star rise in the darkness. A light shining into the world. And they said, "We're gone. We're leaving. We're going to find him. This is the most important thing." They left everything to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him, and assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. Herod had to get everybody around him, the scribes, the chief priests, and he goes, "Hey, where's the Messiah? Where's the Christ going to be born?" And they told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet." And I love that Matthew paraphrases here. "And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come" what? "A ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Before Jesus has done anything but be born, people from the east, wise men, are looking to the stars and they're going, "There's something different. A light is shining in the darkness, and we're going to go find out what has happened because we think it's about a king." And they come to the wrong place. They come to Jerusalem, the great city, because they think that's where he's going to be. And even Herod has to check with the priests and the scribes and say, "Wait, where is this going to be?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, Bethlehem." So they go to Bethlehem to find the one who would be the ruler who would shepherd over his people. This little town in which God used to bring light to the world. There's a church over this spot right now, the Church of the Annunciation, where Jesus was born, or they believe Jesus to be born, where hundreds of thousands of people go all the time just to view where Christ may have been born, in this little tiny town. Let me ask you something. If it were up to you, where would the Messiah have been born? The best hospital? The biggest city? The place where the most TV cameras would be? Or somebody would throw it up on Facebook Live or YouTube or Twitter or something and get the word out there as quickly as possible? Would you choose a stable with a carpenter and a teenage virgin? I'm glad that God knows better than I do. I'm glad that his ways are higher than my ways and his words are greater than my words. Because I think if the Messiah would have been born in a place that we would have picked, we may have missed it. But what did God do that night in Bethlehem? What did he do? He took on flesh. He was Emmanuel, God with us, the Savior of the world, come to a carpenter and a teenager who were sent to Bethlehem because they had to pay taxes. This little town that sat in the shadow of mighty Jerusalem, of this great city. God fulfilled prophecy. He did what he said he would do. It's pretty remarkable if you think about it. How often we doubt that God will do what he says he will do, and yet we see it over and over again. Bethlehem, a ruler will come, will shepherd his flock. I mean, come on. You can't make it up. God just fulfills what he said he would do 800 years apart through insignificant people staying in a barn in a really insignificant town off the beaten path that was known for its bread. God did the most significant thing we could imagine, and he brought love to the world. The bread of life. In the cry of an infant when he took his first breath, God announced his presence to the world. If God had come in a mighty way, we may have missed it. And over 2,000 years ago, God put his plan into motion to save the world to the cry of a baby who was born to die. And that's why we're here. That's why the church comes together, so that we can celebrate who Christ is. That his plan came into action, that he was born 33 some years later. He died on the cross to save us. And now, once we've accepted him, we are his plan for sharing that same love with the world. We're the ones who get to tell the message. We're the ones who get to tell the story until the day of Christ's return. 2,000 years ago or so, light came to the world. Now, we are approaching the winter solstice. We are in the midst of the darkest days of the year. It's very intentional in the church calendar that Advent happens now. It's intentional that Christmas is actually celebrated now, because Jesus probably wasn't born in December. I hate to burst that bubble for you. But it's intentional that it's here, because as soon as the darkest days have appeared, we celebrate light coming to the world. That's why we celebrate this time of year. That's why we celebrate Advent, the coming of the Christ, the coming of the Messiah, of light coming down. And we get to share that light with the world. Now, you may think you're small and insignificant and your voice doesn't matter. But guess what? It does. And the moment you chose to follow and accept Christ, you became his mouthpiece. You became his voice to the world. You became the one who now gets to shine and share that light. You may think our church is small and insignificant. Guess what? We matter. And we get to take a message of hope to the world, a message of love that Christ brought down to a little tiny town years ago. You know what I love about my hometown? There's not a lot of great things that happen there. But from a little church there, I know that there's a guy in New Zealand preaching the Word of God right now. And there are people all over the world who are impacted for the kingdom because of that little town. Just like because of our church, there are people all over the world being impacted for the kingdom. Now, you may think you have to go someplace to share the gospel. You don't. You get to do that right here. That's what we say. We meet others where they live so they can know Jesus. You may think that God already did the work, that he came and he died and he saved us. And yay, great, we get to celebrate that and come together to think about us all the time. Guess what? That's not what the Bible says. That's not what the gospel message is. That's not why Christ came to Bethlehem 2,000 plus years ago to be born and take on flesh. He came to save the whole world. And if we're not doing our part to share that message with others, then why are we coming together? You're not insignificant. Your voice matters. What you do for the kingdom matters. And we all work for the kingdom to shine the light of Christ in this world until our dying breath or Christ returns, whichever comes first. It's not about your strength or your accomplishments. It's about the strength of the one living in you. Bethlehem happened long, long ago, but that light will shine forever. It is conquering the darkness one day at a time. The darkness seems dark now, but there will be a day when it is defeated forever. No matter how small you think you are, God wants you to shine in the darkness. He uses ordinary people to share his love with the world. God uses ordinary people to meet others where they are so they can know Jesus and experience that love that he gives. And he wants you to share the message of his love. Father, I pray that we would be people who are not content to sit, but people motivated to share your name with as many as we can and tell people who you are. God, that we would realize that we're partners in the gospel message and we get to go from this place daily shining for you. God, I'm so thankful that you used a prophet in 800 BC to write about the Messiah who would come in the most intimate details. And that you fulfilled your word. And if you fulfilled your word then we know you will fulfill your word now. God, help us to lean into you like Jesus did and to follow where you lead. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for coming on a night when we go in Bethlehem. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Would you stand? I don't know what's going on in your heart, but if you have a decision to make, if you need to pray with somebody, I'd love to pray with you or talk to you so you can come up as we stand.
I'm hoping for this starlit night. My King is born in Bethlehem. I journey
thankful that you are here with us today. I pray that you've been encouraged and challenged to go and share God's love with the world. Don't forget our trees. If you've got gifts for any of those three things, please bring those back as soon as you can. 2 opportunities to invite your friends. The candlelight service on next weekend at 6 o'clock. The choir will be singing and the kids will be performing a little as part of that. And also Christmas Eve service. I told you before, I'll tell you again, Christmas Eve is currently the highest attended service of the year in the world. So it's a great time. It's a very easy time to invite people to come and hear what Christ has done for them because they're willing to go to church on Christmas Eve. Let me pray with you. I will sing and then we'll be dismissed. Father, thank you for bringing light to the world, for bringing hope to our hearts, for saving us. May we go from this place convinced that you have something great in store for us as we share your name. God, may we take every opportunity to share who you are, to show your love to others. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Worthy is the Lamb who slain. Worthy is the King who conquered the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who slain. Worthy, worthy, worthy. Oh, this is amazing grace. This is amazing love. They will take my place. They will bear my cross. You lay down your life. Have me set free. Oh, Jesus, I say all that you've done for me.